Welcome to Penn State Berks LionSide Chats. We will get started in just a minute. If you want to check your audio settings at this point, please feel free to do so, and we'll get started in just a minute. All right, welcome to Penn State Berks LionSide Chats. My name is Ryan Hassler. I'm one of the 3 LionSide Chat moderators working alongside Don Pfeiffer-Reitz and Sonia De La Cueto. Come on in and welcome to our campus. We are so glad that you could join us today. Before we get started, we want to share that you should please feel free to submit questions throughout the entire program via the Q&A feature. We actually will also be using the chat feature tonight. Our presenters would like some interaction. And so you will be also using the chat feature. We will not, at least unless the presenters would like to, we will not be using the raised hand feature. Once the presenters conclude, we will facilitate a discussion, and we will also be recording today's session, so you can revisit the topic or even share the experience with friends and family. Now we are excited to introduce Alex Chisholm and Sarah Hartman-Caverly, who are both reference and instructional librarians at the Thun Library at Penn State Berks. Alex and Sarah are collaborators on privacy literacy research, and tonight they will be talking about digital wellness. So Sarah and Alex, welcome to LionSide Chats, and I will invite you to take on the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Sorry, I was just getting my screen all set up. But thank you to everybody who's joining us tonight. Just to give a little bit of a warning to everybody, if you've been to a LionSide Chat before, our format might be a little bit different. This is very much a workshop style, so we'll be interacting throughout and asking you guys to participate a bit. You don't have to share anything that you aren't comfortable with, and we've set it up so that a lot of it can be anonymous. So feel free to join us in that format. So I'm Alex, and I will let Sarah unmute herself and introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening and giving Alex and I an excuse to talk about privacy and digital wellness with you. As Alex mentioned, my name is Sarah, and I'm another librarian at Penn State Berks in Thun Library. So we look forward to working with you all, those of you who will be attending at Penn State Berks in the near future.
All right, so we're gonna get started now. So just to give you a little bit of a roadmap on what we're planning to talk about today, we're gonna be reflecting on your digital wellness priorities, learning about how our digital practices impact our personal well-being, including our relationships, our mental health, and our professional aspirations. And at the end, we're going to have a takeaway, which is a digital wellness wheel that you'll be able to develop just to align your habits and goals that you've come up with throughout the session. So our first activity that we're asking you to do, and I think Sarah should have probably popped a link to our workshop guide in your chat, but we're going to take a moment, and what in a traditional classroom would be stations around the room, we're going to ask that you use a Padlet to reflect on some questions having to do with your wellness. So if you open up the link that Sarah popped into the chat, it should take you to this page. We're just asking that you scroll down here, and we have 5 reflection questions for you. So just to show you a little bit of how this works, we have the questions lined up here. You can scroll across to view them all. And to add in some participation, we're just asking you use these little plus buttons to respond to the questions. So our reflections are, what does wellness mean to you? Also, you can list some examples of healthy habits. We're asking what your wellness priorities are, and we understand that right now during quarantine, our priorities may be shifting and changing quite a great deal. You can identify barriers to your well-being goals, and also what are some of your imbalance indicators that signal that you're going off track. So we just ask for you to feel free to share some anonymous feedback in here. We'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And you can see we do have some reflections from previous classes that we've taught on this. And if you're having any trouble, please feel free to use the chat. We can help troubleshoot a little bit. So as everybody's just kind of responding, I can kind of go through a little bit of what people have previously talked about with us. So in terms of wellness, some people were talking about emotional intelligence and kind of a balance between the body, mind, and soul, which was a really interesting reflection for us. Something that I know I've thought about a lot too. Proactive, healthy way of living, having a positive attitude, self-awareness, all of these sorts of things. With healthy habits, people were talking a lot about physical exercise and taking time to relax, reading, creative work, just things outside of work and school. So eating right, healthy things like that. Priorities, again, having spiritual growth, physical health, positivity is another really big one. So maybe there's some positive psychology people that have been to some of our workshops. So some barriers are always time. I can agree with that. Distractions being counterproductive, time management. Yes, that is a big one for me as well. And imbalance indicators. I think all of us have different ways of being able to tell when we're kind of going off track and we're not getting what we need. We're not in a very good place. So sleep and mood changes, those are big ones. Eyes getting tired from too much screen time. This really relates to our topic tonight of digital wellness. So, you know, when we're on our phones or iPads or computers too much, sometimes that happens. Anxiety, this also can be brought on by too much tech use. Impatience, I can relate to that as well. So lots of reflections in here. I'm going to pop back over to our slides, and please feel free to continue with feedback in there if you're interested in sharing. And now I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing all of your thoughts and experiences with respect to wellness through the Padlet activity. So you may have noticed we asked some very general open-ended questions, reflection questions around wellness. We weren't necessarily asking you about technology, but now we're going to start to make some of those connections. So some really interesting things started to happen in the 2007-2008 timeframe. So that's around the time when at least I was graduating from undergrad, from college with my 4-year degree. I was a little bit ahead of Alex, a little bit older than Alex, right? But in that time frame, that's the first point at which Americans, when they were surveyed, reported that they were spending more time interactive with screens than doing other active leisure activities. So 2007, 2008, we see this tipping point where screen time is exceeding sort of all other leisure activities, right, in our active leisure time. That same year, 2007, also saw the largest one-year drop in reported outdoor recreation activities in the United States. So again, a very interesting data point, an interesting correlation, right? That same year, we see this huge decline in outdoor recreational or outdoor leisure activity. Now by 2018, running that same survey, they found that nearly 50% of Americans engaged in no outdoor recreation. So in that 10-year time frame from 2007, 2008 to 2018, all of a sudden now we have half of the US population reporting no outdoor recreation whatsoever in a year, right? Which is a really interesting and amazing shift when you think even broader about the whole scope of human history and our relationship to nature, right? So if we dig a little bit deeper into, well, what are these behaviors? What are these activities, these screen-based activities that are taking over our time and attention? A lot of it involves interacting with our devices and our phones. So additional research has found that we interact with our phones somewhere in the neighborhood 2,600 or 2,600 times in a given day. That was reported by The Guardian. And again, when we're interacting with our phone, we're not like interacting with our phone, right? I mean, we might be asking Siri a question, but generally speaking, we're interacting with other people through our devices, right? And so additional studies have found huge trends in online socializing. And you might be laughing at this point. Alex and I obviously put this slide deck together prior to pandemic-related public health measures that are now keeping us apart and socializing through technology even more. But at the time that we were putting the slide deck together, what we were finding is that online socializing and online technology-mediated social activity was now accounting for the most common way that young adults were interacting with each other. So again, we see this kind of drawback from more active leisure activities into screen time. We see a withdrawal really from outdoor recreation and nature-based recreation, again, into spending more time with devices. And then we see a withdrawal, and it's even more marked now during the pandemic, right? From direct social interaction with each other to technology-mediated social interaction. And it's all happening in this very brief, relative again to all of human history, right? This very brief timeline, and with maybe massive implications for our own personal well-being as well as for our social well-being. So a very large factor in this whole equation for Alex and myself is privacy. This slide is showing you a conceptual framework that Alex and I have developed in the course of our teaching and our research about privacy. So we call this the 6 private I's. Now, if you've heard people talk about privacy, you've probably heard them talk about it as a technology problem. And that's not a wrong way to approach the discussion of privacy, right? But Alex and I, as librarians and as information ethicists, look at the privacy challenge a little bit differently. We think of it as a human problem and a sort of a value or culture problem before it's a technology problem, right? So that's kind of the dimension of privacy that we're looking at together and that we're trying to figure out solutions for. So the 6 private I's walks you through all of the positive benefits for privacy in your life as just an independent individual human being and also as a social person, right? And it also helps us reframe the wellness conversation around technology to consider some of the hidden harms that might not otherwise be obvious to us unless we consider privacy itself as sort of an intrinsic part of the human condition that itself can be harmed, right? So when we think about privacy and think about it not just as a form of protecting our data, but really protecting ourselves and our experience, the 6 private I's framework helps us do that. So at the very center of our personal privacy is our core sense of identity, our core sense of self. That's our most private I, right? Our very identity. The sense that we have some amount of free will, which is an interesting debate we can get into, right? Some amount of autonomy, some amount of freedom of choice, that we get to decide who we want to be in the world, that we get to live in accordance with our own conscience, right? That's that identity piece of privacy. And then if you move a little bit further out in terms of your privacy, now we're talking about some intellectual activities of the mind, right? The things that we like to think about when we're going off to college. So these are your value systems, your creativity, your belief systems, your ability to experiment with ideas, to read freely the information of your choosing, and to consider information from a broad array of viewpoints and perspectives and kind of arrive at your own conclusions. So all those activities of the mind and decision making, those aspects of the intellect, is your second private I. Now, moving a little bit further out in our privacy model, getting a little less private every step that we take, right? We can talk about integrity. And we have 2 different forms of integrity. One is more technology related than the other, probably. So the first one is just your bodily integrity. This is literally your right to be left alone. This is also the basis for a lot of legal rights around privacy. So just as an example, reproductive choice making. A lot of those legal rights are based upon interpretations of the right to bodily privacy and autonomy. So just as an example. So you have bodily integrity on the one side. On the other side, you have what's called contextual integrity. Contextual integrity, right? Context matters. So this is the idea that the right people know the right things about you at the right time, and that you get to participate in managing those personal information flows. So if you think about your best friend, your significant other, and a close family member, those 3 people in your life are going to know largely overlapping and yet slightly distinct sets of information about you, right? And that's part of how you actually act out all those relationships. So this idea of having contextual integrity is about protecting your identity in all the different social roles that you play and allowing you to present certain versions of yourself in all of those different contexts. So that ability to control those personal information flows with contextual integrity feeds directly into those very close relationships we talked about, right? This idea that you can have intimate relationships that no third party can intrude upon. So that's your intimacy. That is also kind of a factor of social privacy. And we'll see as we get into our case studies today that introducing technology into our most closest relationships can complement them or complicate them, right, in a lot of ways. So we may be relying on technology to stay close to each other, but certain uses of social media, for instance, can really make a mess of our relationships. So that's something that we want to be mindful about, intimacy being sort of that fourth private eye. And then at the very outermost edge of your zone of privacy, you have this ability to decide freely with whom you want to interact and kind of exercise that freedom of association. And then also you get to decide, and Alex and I kind of always joke, we're introverts, so we really like this ability to kind of decide when we want to withdraw, be in self-determined isolation, be kind of in seclusion from the rest of society and free from the interference and the observation of others. So those are your 6 private eyes. And when you think about digital wellness and the role of technology in your personal well-being, you don't just want to think about the way that technology is maybe acting on you, which we'll talk about, or the ways that maybe you can take advantage of certain wearable technologies, for instance, to kind of monitor and track and optimize your own health. But you also want to be bearing in mind, how is my use of these technologies impacting my personal privacy? That's a whole facet of my well-being that itself can also be harmed, right? So you always want to kind of have that privacy check as part of your analysis when we talk about the way that technology plays a role in your wellness and in your well-being. So we're going to shift gears now into looking at some of our case studies, and we're going to do it in the context of a digital wellness wheel. So I'll send you a link here to our digital wellness wheel worksheet through the chat. So if you'd like to pull it up on your end, feel free, although it's certainly not necessary. You're probably familiar with the wellness wheel concept. So we often have a wellness wheel. Maybe you've participated in some kind of other wellness workshop where you've developed one. So it's thinking of your personal well-being kind of as a pie chart, right? And each wedge in the pie chart focuses on a different facet of wellness. So we have things like our intellectual wellness. This is our education, our learning, our ability to read freely, to feel creativity, those things we talked about with 6 private eyes, right? We have social wellness. This is the quality of our relationships, how much time we're dedicated to our social relationships. Again, that intimacy factor and whether we have some parts of certain relationships that are kind of beyond the reach of others, whether we feel supported and are offering support, and whether we feel like we are belonging to a community, right, and actively participating in a community. You want to think about your financial and professional health. So what is the role of technology in helping you budget, or maybe not budget, depending, right? How will it impact your income, things like your work hours, your performance, potentially workplace monitoring is something that we can look at, especially in the context of the pandemic. And then are you feeling like, you know, your professional and financial life is purposeful and meaningful? And in what sense is technology playing a role in that facet of your financial or professional wellness? Fun and recreational wellness, again, gets back to that idea about like, how are we spending our leisure time? What hobbies are you participating in? Passions, just laughter, like, are you generally, you know, is life good? If not, maybe technology is something to look at. If it is, maybe technology is something that you have to thank for that, right? And then rounding us out, some of the more traditional categories that we might think of in terms of our wellness and well-being would be our sort of mental, spiritual, and emotional well-being. You know, check in with your self-esteem. Do you feel like you're feeling like life is purposeful, meaningful? What's your stress level, right? Do all those check-ins. Are you spending enough time sort of on personal reflection, meditation, self-awareness, all these things that kind of keep us on track with ourselves, right? And then finally, just your physical well-being. What is the role of technology in your physical well-being? So we might think about nutrition, eating habits, diet, fitness. Sleep quality is a big one. Check in with yourself about sleep quality. Relaxation, your general sense of like, are you feeling like you're in fight or flight mode all the time, or do you feel kind of contented and relaxed? What's your general environment like? And even things like your appearance. You know, we're all going to be spending a lot of time together on Zoom, so you want to get your, you know, your Zoom voguing in order. Not to diminish that there. But so what we want you to be thinking about now is if you're generating a wellness wheel, maybe think about your top 3 wellness priorities of those wedges, right? So it could be intellectual, spiritual and emotional, and financial and professional. Those would be my 3. And then we want you to think about your top priority. We're going to ask you to kind of participate in doing a case study and reporting out on your findings for your top priority. So let's say I pick my top priority as financial or professional wellness. We're going to provide you with a list of quick case studies. There may be 5 to choose from within your priority area. We'll ask you to just select one case study and skim it. You do not have to read it. And then what we're looking for you to do is report something else, you know, report something that you found out back to the group. So for other people who are thinking they might want to focus on their financial or professional wellness in the context of digital wellness, what did you learn? What are some things we need to consider? What are some tips or tricks that you learned in your case study? So we'll ask you to select one of these priority areas, read one of the relevant case studies, and then we'll have a period of time where you can skim your case study, a few minutes, and then we'll call everybody back together and report out on our priority area, the case study we read, and then what we found out.
And so just to show you, I did send a link specifically to that case study activity here. If you scroll down, there's another Padlet under all the case studies. And just as a reminder, here are some questions that we're asking, and you can feel free to add in some feedback on whatever your wellness goal was, your top priority. You can find your column and you can add in some feedback on something you learned from a case study. So we'll give you maybe 5 minutes to select one and skim, and then we'll come back to discuss a bit. All right, so just to check in with everybody in case you missed what we're working on, we're gonna be exploring some case studies on the guide, and I can send the link to that activity again. We're just asking for you to be browsing based on your top wellness priority, whatever that may be, whether it's social, recreational, whether it has your intellectual, financial, whatever that may be, and then find your category in here and just take a look at an article. And we're just asking for you to skim it and give us some feedback in the Padlet here on whatever may be something that you learned that you could apply to your wellness goals. And if you'd like to, if you'd rather just use the chat to send us something, if you can feel free to do that as well. And so while everybody, hopefully you've all been able to identify a case study and you're skimming it, or you're going to start sharing on our Padlet. I don't know if Sarah, I'm thinking of an example that I can share out about myself. Maybe you want to be thinking about that so we can share in a moment. And so just while everybody's kind of like hanging out, I will just share one example for me. Something that I was really impactful when I read it was the doom scrolling is slowly eroding your mental health. And this is just really, you know, especially right now at this time, there's a lot going on that can be very, very stressful. And so it's really easy to get onto social media, whether that's Twitter or Facebook, and just constantly be scrolling through that news feed that is endless, and that it's not exactly good for our mental health to be focusing on all these events going on and everything. Being able to limit your time and being able to step away from your phone and have activities with hopefully somebody in your life that you're able to see physically still, maybe getting outside and exercising. But this was a really great article for me personally with emotional wellness and its relationship to technology. I don't know if Sarah has anything in particular.
Well, Alex, I feel like you set me up for the alley, because you know that doom scrolling article connects very well to the article that we have posted from The Guardian. I believe it's under the intellectual wellness category, the Our Minds Can Be Hijacked article. So this is a great example of the different way that Alex and I approach these issues, right? So when you read the doom scrolling article, that's kind of framed around it being a user issue, right? A user error, like you're spending too much time on your device. What's interesting about this Guardian article, the Our Minds Can Be Hijacked article, is an interview with some people who have essentially defected from Silicon Valley and from these large technology companies that are responsible for some of these designs. Doom scrolling is a behavior that is encouraged by an intentional design. So perhaps some of us are old enough to remember a time before infinite scroll of some of these interfaces, right? Like eventually you reach the end of your Twitter feed, you reach the end of your Facebook feed, you reach the end of the Reddit page. Like eventually these things used to end. And then at some point they introduced infinite scroll. It was an intentional software engineering and user experience design choice, right? Which is a lot of what this article is about. And so now we see this phenomenon of doom scrolling, how it's impacting people's anxiety, family relationships, sleep quality, and physical health. It's important to understand that that was connected to some intentional design choices, which also gives me a little opportunity to roll out my soapbox and talk directly to any engineering, business, or computing program students. As your liaison librarian, I want to make sure that you are accounting for some of these ethical choices in the products and services that you'll be designing and marketing and gathering data from for your marketing analysis, right? So that's the way that some of these case studies might work together if you wanted to revisit some of these ideas and some of this content. And obviously, if you didn't already pick up on this, Alex and I love to talk about privacy, technology, impacts on society, and personal well-being. So you're very welcome to follow up with us, and we'll make sure that you have our contact information at the end of the session.
Okay, so it looks like we got some responses here. So some things under the physical category: how free time becomes screen time. I'm going to put down my phone and exercise more. And that is so, so true. I know I do this. I stay up. I had a vacation week last week, and I would find myself on my phone even at night, and I knew I didn't have to wake up and get to any meetings in the morning, and so I would just be up really late on my phone. So yes, it really does suck up your time. I think of fitness tracking as motivating for me as an individual, but I totally see how it shows my privilege based on the data showing who uses and has access to them. I should be grateful. Yeah, and that's really great. That's one of the positive cases for some technology, and fitness tracking is certainly something that motivates a lot of people. And I'm sure at this time, like there's communities that you can, you know, exercise and challenge friends and family. And so that can be really positive. Under intellectual, we have something. I can't believe how many advertisements I receive on social media based on my previous web searches or even conversations I'm having out loud with others. And yes, this gets back to a little bit of what Sarah was talking about. There's some obviously attention engineering behind these designs, but yes, we're certainly being monitored. Everything we're using, even those great fitness trackers that can be so motivating, that data gets sucked up and sold to third parties, and it can really be used to nudge you to make other purchases and to behave in certain ways, and there's just a lot of impact there. So under social, we have some things. The introduction of infinite scrolling has definitely had a negative impact on my digital life, especially regarding my anxiety. I'm familiar with some of the tools used to limit what I receive, but I feel as I do not use them as often as I should be. Yeah, and like I mentioned, infinite scrolling, the doom scrolling, it's real, and it's, yeah, as Sarah mentioned, I remember when Facebook didn't even have a news feed. I remember how upset everyone was when that happened. All right, so financial and professional. I am not the only one who feels as if I can never disconnect. Although I thrive on being busy with work, it is totally important to sometimes disconnect. And I completely agree. Having my work email on my phone, even on vacation last week, I was checking my email. So it's certainly, you know, hard to remove yourself from that. So never ending work. Yeah, reading the article about never ending work, I was intrigued about the idea that technology was developed to make our lives easier, yet we are always on. And as a working professional managing a family, I find it hard to balance being on and being off. Yes, absolutely. And that's something that a lot of researchers are starting to study, the fact that technology was supposed to free up our time, but it's actually just bled into our personal time and made us have even less time. We're always on. And then again, how free time became screen time. Yeah, these are all really great. Thank you so much for sharing some of your thoughts on all of that. And I think the responses really reflect the fact that these technologies can be really positive and helpful, and also can have unintended by us impacts, but sometimes it's designed intentionally. So Sarah, did you have anything to add on any of that before we move along?
No, I think Alex and I don't always just come out directly and say what it is that we think you should do to solve some of these problems. Again, in case you didn't pick up on that, we maybe lean more towards the more privacy paranoid end of the spectrum of privacy preferences and of digital wellness preferences. So we don't want that to bleed through too much. But one thing that I do often say to students, and it sounds like maybe some folks in this group would benefit from hearing it, is like, give yourself permission to disconnect. Because speaking as, you know, a former student and now as someone who works at Penn State's not going to give you that permission. So you need to give yourself permission that you cannot be a full-time student, you cannot be a full-time instructor or administrator or librarian. As we mentioned, when we looked at the 6 privatized framework, we all play a wide variety of personal and social roles. We need to be allocating time, attention, and love to all of those different roles. And so if you are constantly connected, if you are constantly checking your work email, even on vacation, bad Alex, if you are constantly attending to all of these different streams of yourself through technology, you can't really optimally attend to any of them. And I think that that's what contributes to a lot of us feeling very pulled in many directions and like we're not accomplishing anything meaningful in any of these single spheres of our lives. We're not able to dedicate that time and attention to them singularly in turn, right? So I guess my main takeaway is not about your privacy settings or whether or not to use technology, but it is to be sure that you give yourself permission to disconnect and to re-engage with yourself individually and with some of your close relationships that hopefully you don't need technology to mediate, although obviously that's more challenging now.
And I'll just mention to tag on to what Sarah said, if you're feeling this, you are not alone. And as we talked about earlier, it is by design that our attention is being funneled to technology. It is addictive intentionally. So if you're interested in investigating that a little more and pulling back the curtain and learning why these things exist, again, Sarah and I are always ready to nerd out and talk about that because it is by design and it takes work and dedication to remove yourself from those things and set aside the time you need. All right. So I think now we're going to continue with our digital wellness wheel. We want to give everybody just a few minutes with the worksheet to think a little bit about how, and let me pull that back up, how you can be prioritizing things in your life. So let me get this reopened. I think I have it open here, actually. So we're just asking for you to reflect. We'll give you like maybe 2 minutes to think about this, and we'll open it up for Q&A after that. But how is technology negatively and or positively impacting this area of my wellness? And how can I leverage or cut out technology to improve my wellness? What steps can I take to improve my habits? So you can write in your priority or take notes on a sheet of paper, just think about it and reflect on each priority that you kind of brainstormed. So we'll give you like a minute or two. This is more of a takeaway than anything. And we'll dive into Q&A. All right, and I think that wellness wheel will serve more of as a takeaway today. I don't know if Sarah wants to add anything before we dive into Q&A. We just have up on the screen here some things to consider when you're working on your tech wellness balance. One we talked a lot about was screen time monitoring and attention engineering and persuasive design. That came up a lot, but there are always other issues to consider with tech use.
I'll share another tip that came from a prior workshop participant actually, and that was someone who recognized through reflection that they were filling in a lot of those like blank parts of your day with technology. So, you know, you're waiting for the coffee pot to finish and you've got those couple of minutes and you're scrolling on your phone, or, you know, you're waiting because you're picking up the kids somewhere or whatever, and you're scrolling through your phone or whatever. All those kinds of moments of downtime, they found that they were filling with their technology. And those moments of downtime can be really interesting just to have your head up and observing the world around you, running through your to-do list in your own mind, right? What's left to be done, just kind of like recentering yourself on where you are and what's going on in the real world. So in addition to giving yourself permission to disconnect, I would say, you know, when you have those moments of downtime, to me, they're like little gifts. Like I have like unstructured, unscheduled free time, right? I don't want to be giving that away to Twitter. It's too precious. So just be really self-aware and reflective in those moments where you find yourself having these brief, you know, moments of freedom. Do you want to be giving that away to your device? Just be really selective, right? Your time, your attention is precious, and we don't always treat it that way.
All right, so we can open it up for questions.
Great, thank you, Sarah and Alex. I'm going to invite Dawn now to facilitate the question and answer. So welcome, Dawn.
Awesome, thank you, Alex, Sarah. Thank you so much for this wonderful peek into a different concept when you think about wellness. I've been using that wellness wheel since, let me tell you, the 80s when I was in residence life training as an RA back at Westchester. And it hasn't really changed much, but it's nice to take a look at it from this perspective. So I appreciate everything the two of you do in this space, and I thank you for that. I invite our audience to throw out some questions if you have some, or some reflections on this experience tonight. And while we're waiting for some questions from the audience, I do have a couple of things that I've created here on my own. The concept that we were talking about earlier about the giving permission to disconnect, and I think even someone had commented, thank you for that. I think that's so really important. As a faculty member, I am very prescriptive in my syllabus when I'm telling my students about when and how I will contact them back or get back to them in what time. And I think what I'm going to do for this year, especially in light of our new normal, and I'm going to also put in some kind of wellness statement for my students to give them permission to disconnect, right? And I think that in our world, we have to be mindful of the ability to leverage technology. And I think that was in one of the things that you guys had a minute ago. And I also think it's okay for people to work when they can work, because some of us have young children, some of us are caring for sick parents, or, you know, we have jobs, and we'll get our work done when we get our work done. And it should be okay. And I shouldn't judge if someone's responding to an email of mine at 2 in the morning, if that's what the time is. So I think that's really important. So I appreciate that the two of you shared that tonight, and I'm making a note to add that to my syllabi for this coming semester. Does anyone in our audience have anything that they want to ask? Or Ryan, did you have anything that you wanted to inquire about?
I was just curious, what do you both, and I know you said you sometimes don't like to, you know, shed some of your opinions and sort of sway things, but well, can you both maybe reflect on this digital environment we're in now, being that it's, you know, work, it's school, you know, especially for incoming freshmen, you know, this is a brand new environment for them. So while it's time and it's important to shut down, there's also, you know, time where it's important to be engaged as well. So like, do you have any suggestions on, you know, those balances? And let me just add one other piece to that. I was in conversation with a friend of mine who said, I don't know how I'm going to have my students be online in school. These are younger students come fall semester. But I personally know, and I joked to her, I said, well, but aren't your kids online playing video games for 4 hours at night? So I don't know if you can kind of maybe talk about the difference between maybe those work obligations and the pleasure of the digital sort of environment.
Sure. Just to immediately say, Sarah and I will always give our opinion. We just don't like to be prescriptive with students.
Okay.
We're very strongly opinionated about all these things, but I feel like Sarah has something that she wants to throw out. I'll let her go first.
Well, I was mostly laughing about how the way that we have tried to build that engagement, certainly in the learning environment, but also in the digital work environment, is to gamify it by adopting some of the conventions of video games, whether it's, you know, maybe don't have them activated in webinar mode, but if you're in a Zoom meeting, you can give a thumbs up, you can give a clap, you can have reactions. People get very creative with emojis and chat. Same with, you know, there's weird things going on now in my Microsoft Outlook with all of these like wellness feedbacks and, you know, the auto text complete and all this like gamifying and sort of bringing in all those conventions from the gamified world. It's a little bit of a poison pill for me, I think, still. And I think part of my concern coming from my disciplinary perspective with privacy being at the root of intellectual freedom, certainly in the academic context, is what are the implications for free inquiry and for real free good faith discussion and constructive disagreement within the academic setting when we are mediating all of that scholarly exploration through technology, which we have to know, and some of us may know more than others because some of us are paranoid and choose to study it, that all of that opens us up to all of these various forms of surveillance. And we might traditionally think of government surveillance, or we might now think more of corporate surveillance. But I think we also have to think about this kind of like social peer surveillance as well. It's a very unsettling time to be experimenting with ideas. And as like a librarian and a scholar, that's difficult for me to wrestle with. And then as someone who really cares about the undergraduate student experience and use the undergraduate student experience as the future of free inquiry and scholarship and discovery, it's also unsettling to think about what this means in terms of the, you know, the mindsets and the intellectual habits that we adopt in adapting to this very surveillable digital learning and teaching environment. So I don't know if that's where you expected that to go. But
no and yes. I mean, I don't know where I expected it to go. Just these are ongoing conversations I'm having with friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't want to ignore what's going on in the chat. So Alex, if you have thoughts, and then I see that we have some.
Sure.
Yeah, I have some questions that have come in, so.
Cool.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. I don't want to waste any time on my thoughts on that, except for that it's all bleeding together. And a lot of the conversations I have with people is because we have to connect for work and socially, almost exclusively digitally right now.
Yeah.
It's together more than ever before. And that kind of feeds into the comment we have here. Somebody was talking about how they've been very versed to using mobile phones and they're very like regimented about how much screen time that they have, but that you know, it's really easy to lose track of where you are digitally, and it can be hard to realize how it's just amazing to realize how much time you've wasted on a screen. And I know that I've experienced that as well, but it all bleeds together and it's damaging. I know when we first went remote, I would tell Sarah I'd get up and I'd start working. I didn't have to get ready for work. So I'd be at my desk at 7 a.m. and I don't have children. I just have pets right now. And so I'd be working till like 7 p.m., 8 p.m. And I'd be like, how did I work for 12 hours? That's not helpful. So
Yeah.
but let's get to the good stuff.
I appreciate all of that. One of the questions that came in the Q&A was more so a comment, and it was that the comment was, I appreciate this session and found that muting email notifications on my phone after a certain time has helped me to disconnect a bit. And that's something that I have been doing for a good maybe year and a half right now. I have no notifications that come up other than weather and then my reminders. So I have to be intentional to go into my email. I have to be intentional to go into my text. I have to be intentional to go into any of my news feeds, you know, from any of my social media. And that has really helped me a lot. And for anybody that's not doing that, I highly recommend it. Even using the do not disturb feature that comes on an iPhone. I don't know about any of the other platforms, but I think it's a really good way to help manage that wellness. And I would imagine that you ladies agree.
That is the best piece of advice you could give. I have never and will never turn notifications on my phone. And I, like Sarah and I can actually speak to a colleague that does not work at Berks campus. So we're not, you know, information about someone anyone knows, but we couldn't have a conversation with them when they were visiting because notifications would come on their smartwatch and they could not prevent themselves. And it's designed to give you that like rush.
Yeah. It's that whole Pavlovian dog thing.
Yeah. That's part of that persuasive design that they have, so that even the ding on my desktop from my email, which I don't have them on my phone, thank goodness, it completely distracts you from the work that you're in. And it's like a good 20 minutes to get back into deep work after that. So
yeah, no, that's a really good point.
Can I make a question there? You know, I'm probably that guilty person because I get notifications all the time, I'll admit it. But I have just bought a Apple Watch. This is the first time I bought it, right? I mean, maybe two, 3 weeks ago. And it's really because I started running a lot more outside. But maybe just a comment, I kind of like that it reminds me to stand up and walk away from my computer because then I get to detach. So every time I get that notification, it does tell me, hey, I need to go do something. And so, you know, I can see what you're saying, but at the same time, I think it also is helping me to detach as well.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I just want to remind our audience, we're not using the raise hand feature. If you do have questions, either go through the chat and or the Q&A and we'll manage them that way. Thank you.
We had a great comment, and it connects to what you were saying, Dawn, about intentionality. And Joseph talked about the news cycle being intrusive and these technologies being intrusive. And I would kind of like dichotomize those two dimensions, right? So like when you are intentional, which does take some work and some effort and some time, there's a for sure opportunity cost, it can mitigate some of those intrusive effects of the technology. Otherwise, you are sort of on this like, you know, endorphin or like adrenaline overload all the time because alerts, if it's a news alert, then you know what the headline is going to look like. If it's, you know, a text, it kind of depends on who it's coming from and the tone and all of that. And same with work email is, you know, not usually a joy. So yeah, so just managing those intrusions and being intentional and putting them in the box. So like, you know, it's the weekend and I've said I'll be monitoring email for this hour, this chunk of time, but then I'm going to off. I think that's really important.
And to your point, Ryan, I completely agree. I used to have a Fitbit and I got it actually to remind me at work to stand up and leave my desk. I have since actually quite long ago abandoned that technology, but there are positive and negatives to all these things. And that's really the main thing that Sarah and I always want with students or any participants in our workshops. It's to give you that power of knowledge and be able to empower you to learn and take what you've learned to make good decisions for yourself. But yeah, the wellness wheel, I just want to throw out there, we have a privacy check-in on that with a resource that helps you kind of evaluate technologies. It's like a risk-benefit analysis, a cost-benefit analysis of sorts. We also have stuff on our workshop guide, both a privacy toolkit and a learn more that kind of helps you make these decisions and learn a little bit more about how these technologies have hidden harms, but also all these positive aspects. So.
We just got a question that came in, or it was more of a statement, and it says there was a phenomenon that caused people to feel phantom vibrations on their smartphones. Are you guys familiar with that?
Yeah, actually, I feel like I read an article about young adults when they had to put their phones away in their lockers. Even they felt like they knew when they were getting an alert or a text. So I haven't investigated it super thoroughly. I don't know if Sarah has, but it was very fascinating. There's a lot of really interesting research. In fact, one of our case studies was about young adults and their relationship with technology. Some scholars had done a 24-hour challenge to remove themselves from digital media, and the withdrawal, like it was actually like a withdrawal. And some of the reactions that the college students had to removing themselves from their digital connections was really fascinating. I will find that link and make sure I put it in the chat so you guys investigate.
Does our audience have any other comments or questions that they want to ask? Because we're getting closer to our time limit here. Excuse me. Oh, thanks, Alex. Appreciate that.
Can I just follow up maybe sort of with a kind of a closing question, unless somebody else has a question? What's your like digital wellness like life pro tip? Like for somebody who just bought the Apple Watch and might be 3-4 years behind the times for some of these things, but I know I need work on that. Like what's the pro tip? What do you think is a starting place maybe?
Oh geez, I mean personally I would say like Dawn brought up earlier, one of my pro tips is to turn off your notifications. Now, obviously, if you're getting notified to get up and move, that's a little different. Like your email pinging every time, or a Facebook, somebody commented or liked, and you get that, endorphin hit, and it's a distraction. So that's one of my pro tips. And also, like, leave your phone. Like, if you go to do an activity, just leave it behind. That's one of my favorite things to do now. I went on a run the other day with no technology. I wasn't listening to anything. I went on a hike without my phone, and it was actually really wonderful. So.
Very nice.
Versus me who can't run without music, and I like complain and I'm like, oh my gosh, I gotta run without the technology and not tracking my heartbeat. But yeah, I mean, I know I need to work on it, but it's
actually, if you find some good trails, I find it very relaxing. And
just do it like Meatless Monday, do Techless Tuesday, and just go for your run and leave the watch behind. It'll be okay. And before you know it, you're going to be doing Watch Free Wednesday, and like it's going to be great.
It's like detoxing in a way when you start removing it. Like I've tried to stop carrying it. I used to carry it around my house.
Yeah.
I'm trying to like leave it in one spot, and it's actually, once you get used to it, it's pretty great. So
it's just that idea that it's not there and you're so used to it, and yeah.
It gets back to that phantom limb, the phantom vibrations. It's becoming an extension of ourselves.
There was another comment in our Q&A, and I'm not sure if you guys will be able to handle this in terms of the technology piece of this, but we'll give it a shot. It says, as a daily Twitter user, I have recently noticed that the trends sometimes change instantly. Even when I hover the cursor over a certain trend, it may suddenly disappear just as I am about to click on it. Do you have an explanation as to why this is?
Man, I'm really bummed.
You can say no, because sometimes we get these really awesome questions in our LionSide chat.
No, I want to go investigate again because I did see a headline about it, and I did not read it. So now I'm really angry with myself.
Well, I'll tell you what, Alex, if you do find that, send me the link and then I'll post it to our LionSide chat Twitter and someone can come back and check that, for that answer down the line if you find it.
Great.
Unless it goes away when it's on your Twitter.
Right.
There you
So it goes away.
There you go. Sarah,
someone-
did you have an answer to that?
Only that I know there are some very current conversations going on about automated versus human mediated moderation of Twitter feeds. So yeah, I'm sure that's similar to the article that Alex is talking about, but always believe your own eyes. That would be the other thing I'd say about interacting with technology is don't let the Twitter feed gaslight you.
Right. Always believe your own eyes. I love someone posted a comment in our Q&A that says they go on walks and they play Pokemon Go. And I know that's been going on for a couple of years. People really enjoy that. So maybe there's a way that you can put a benefit to getting out and activity and with your tech piece. So
that definitely bucks that trend line of outdoor leisure time versus screen time, right? Yeah.
Yep.
We saw kids we never knew existed when that came out a couple years ago. We were like, do they live on this block? Oh, okay.
Yeah. It's just that thing that's living in my front yard they want.
Yeah.
Well, I think that I'll open it up for maybe one more question or comment from our audience before we turn it back over to Ryan. All right, Dr. Hassler, take it away.
I don't see anything else. I would just like to thank you both, Alex and Sarah. I know I have a lot of things to work on. I've known that before this, but you've given me a lot of things to think about. So I do appreciate your talk today on digital wellness. So I thank you for that. I thank our tech tutor, Stanley, who has been standing by just in case we had any technical difficulties, but knock on wood, we were good for tonight. So special thank you to all of you for joining us for today's LionSide Chat. As you click out this webinar, you will receive an access to a survey. Please do take a few minutes required to complete the survey and let us know what your thoughts were about today's chat, perhaps even give us some ideas for future chats. You're encouraged to reach out to us via email, and we will remind you to keep checking our website as we are always adding new chats. And to that notion, our next chat is Thursday, August 6th, this Thursday at 3 p.m. and it's going to be delivered by yours truly. So I will be talking about the search for a COVID-19 vaccine from the statistics perspective. So where are we at and what do we have to expect in terms of the future for a vaccine and the treatment related to COVID-19. So be sure to come back. Hopefully I'll see you on Thursday. Challenge me with your questions, meet another faculty, staff, student, or Penn State Berks to share our experiences. So with that, we just want to say stay safe, Berks and beyond, and we're going to sign off until next time. This has been the Penn State Berks LionSide Chat. Thank you.